Welcome to Disrupting Japan, straight talk from Japan's most successful entrepreneurs. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for joining me. Have you ever been at a crowded and noisy party, and you heard a conversation across the room? You catch pieces of it. You know it's interesting, but you can't quite make it out, and you can't quite push your way over to that side of the room and be a part of it. Well, that was a situation a lot of our guests found themselves in a few weeks ago, and this podcast is going to set things right. You see, 500 startups in Disrupting Japan held a joint event last month that focused on how Japanese and foreign staff can best work together at startups. As part of that event, we gathered together 3 startup founders who are leading multicultural teams, and they shared their candid stories and advice about what they've learned over the years. And they even told us some of their biggest mistakes. It was a great discussion, and the event was a huge success, and we'll definitely be doing it again very soon. But in a way, the event was too successful. Way more people showed up than we expected, and the place was packed. Everyone had a good time, but the room was so packed and so noisy that only the people close to the front got a chance to hear some amazingly good advice and real-life experiences. Well, in this special in-between episode of Disrupting Japan, we're going to fix that for you. If you were in the back, or you couldn't make it out to the event, or if you don't even live in Tokyo, we've got you covered. So sit back and enjoy a conversation with 3 experts on how startups can recruit, retain, and get the very best out of multilingual and multicultural staff. So let's get right to the discussion. Thanks so much. Before we get started, actually, let me just get all the panelists to join me up here on stage, and I'll introduce you all in a moment. Come on up. And to all of those you in the back, I know it's kind of far from the stage, but believe me, you're going to want to listen to this. At some point during this discussion, you're going to hear the one piece of information you came here for. It's going to be the one thing that'll help you, that'll really make a click about how to get Japanese and foreign staff working together. Now, I don't know which one of these 3 is going to say that. I don't know what it's going to be, but I guarantee it's going to happen. So I know it's crowded. I know you in the back is far away, but please come on up and let's have a conversation. All right, and with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. To my immediate left is Shin Sakane of 7 Dreamers. And 7 Dreamers makes the Laundroid, which is a laundry folding robot, which is actually even more complex and way cooler than it sounds. And Shin invested in mixed teams way before it was cool. He's been working on this laundry folding robot for over a decade, and he's been working with foreign talent from pretty close to the beginning. In the middle is Naomi Kurahara, the founder of InfoStellar, which I know, Naomi, I know you hate it when I describe it this way, but it's kind of Airbnb for satellites. She's relatively new and has started with Japanese expertise and brought in foreign staff to help scale up. And on my far left is Jordan Fisher, CEO and founder of Zehitomo. And Jordan kind of came at it from the other direction, in that Zehitomo was a foreign-founded company. The co-founders were all foreign, and they had to reach out to Japanese staff to scale out. So let's give them a big hand. And I'm going to sit down, and I invite you to kind of gather around and listen in while we get started. And I'm in danger of like rolling off the stage here. But actually, just to get started, let's talk about the mechanics of it all. Because there's been a lot of big Japanese companies that have announced that they're going to be all in English. Rakuten, Uniqlo has said so as well. But what do you do? Do you, let's start with you. Do you have an official language for the company? Do you have languages divided by teams? Do you let people just communicate in whatever language they feel is best? How do you handle it?
Well, we have basically no rule. People speak what they want to speak. So we have more Japanese than foreign people. So most people speak in Japanese. But there are a lot of Japanese who speak English. And there are, decent number of foreigners working in our lab and office. And we communicate with our subsidiary in Paris and San Francisco. So of course we speak English in that case. So it's all mixed. Yeah.
But do you have a problem with? So usually when a company has like people can speak any language they like, you end up with these small little niches of these 4 or 5 foreigners who are always hanging out with each other, or this small team of Japanese sales staff who doesn't talk to the rest of the company. Have you have problems with that?
Yes, we did. Clearly. So when that happens, after 1 year, the small team all quit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so because then what we found is what's important is to have a kind of leader or manager class who speak English, well, basically English or Japanese, or sometimes French, but I don't understand French. So either English or Japanese. But what's important is to have a manager who speaks English and Japanese, who could really, inform like foreign people to what's really going on, what's important going on, and that is the key, I thought.
So the key is to have a manager that can really act as an effective bridge between the different cultures. That makes sense. Naomi, what does InfoStellar do? Do you have an official language for the company?
Right, so our official language is English, and our documentation is written in English, including the technical documents and the contract documents. And also the meetings, presentation will be done by English. However, the daily communications we use Japanese, English mixed, because we have still the Japanese and the non-Japanese members. So.
Well, now when and why did you decide to make that transition? Because your whole founding team is Japanese. So when did you make the decision? Like, okay, we're going to start being an English language company from now.
Right. So because of our business, most of our customer is non-Japanese, and of course the space business should be global. So we have to create a global team, and then in the beginning we were all 3 Japanese, but we intentionally got the non-Japanese as initial members.
So did you change to an English language company when you hired your first non-Japanese staff, or before that?
Right, yeah, I realized not having English-speaking people and use the English is something difficult, and it's not natural.
Yes, it is. Jordan, what about you? What did Zeihitomo do? Because you started out are you officially an English language company, or?
Yeah, so we're probably the opposite of InfoStellar or Naomi's case, but we ended up with a similar structure. So we started off in English because as founders we spoke English first, and so that made the most sense. And right now, when we hire salespeople, if we make English the required language, and Zeihitomo is a platform for local service professionals, so it's a pretty domestic market that we're going after, and so our salespeople have very little need to speak English. So if we make the required language for everything be English, then it sets a pretty high hurdle for scaling out a sales organization, operations, and other facets. That said, I think at Zeihitomo we do a pretty good job of making sure the culture stays English. So even though we're speaking in Japanese with the sales team, we use first names, We don't write Japanese business emails where like 90% of it is completely meaningless. All right. In our Slack channels, we use English for the official language and the official communication for anything written, but for anything verbal, when Japanese team members are involved sales, then we speak in Japanese.
So you're trying to maintain as much as the English language, the more of the Western startup culture at the company.
And I think that's much more important.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that about emails, because I find I've been in Japan for almost 25 years now, and I find even when I'm writing email to someone in San Francisco or London, I feel like I have to start with some comment about the weather. It just feels wrong not to. But it's particularly interesting because for me, all the companies I've started, and maybe it was feeling guilty, but as a foreigner in Japan, I always felt like I should make the extra effort to make a Japanese company and make all of the communication in Japanese. And it seems like now that kind of works against you when you try to go global.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people that we want to work with, I think we don't require English for the sales roles, but we want to make sure that people don't have what's called like English allergies, like ego alergi, right? And we want to make sure that they can work within the culture and that they can also really work within a startup mindset, right? And so I'd also say that the majority of Japanese that we've worked with or that don't have ego alergi are able to read and write in Japanese for simple stuff, right? So if our morning messages or kind of notes and stuff are written in English, they're pretty comfortable with actually handling that. But when it comes to having a deep kind of detailed conversation or debate about how we should best modify our sales scripts, doing that in English has very little meaning, I think.
Okay, so company-wide meetings are in English or Japanese?
When the sales team is included, company-wide, it's mixed. For any sales-related discussions, it's in Japanese.
Okay. Naomi, what about InfoStellar? Like a company-wide meeting, is that in English and or Japanese?
English.
English?
Yeah.
Excellent.
We insisting to use English in the in the technical detailed discussion and also the company strategy discussion also. So.
Shin, I know Seven Dreamers is beyond the startup phase, but do you do company-wide meetings bilingually, or how do you handle it?
No, mainly Japanese. 90% Japanese and 10% in English.
All right. Now, it's easy to it's easy to talk about multilingual staff, but do you guys have any special procedures or processes to smooth onboarding, to make sure to manage expectations both of Japanese staff or English language staff that are joining? Is there anything you do to make sure they know what they're getting into? Naomi, what about InfoStellar?
Right. So recently we got American engineers who were not living in Japan before completely. So we were talking long time, but during that period I thought many people who were not living in Japan, they have lack of information about the particular things about life in Japan. So we have to explain we have to remove such vague feelings of anxiety.
So were they just looking for information about like how to rent an apartment, or was it more just general anxiety about what it's like to work in Japan?
Right. So we especially talked about the visa process, and also the official language in company and how much English you can use outside of company, and also the relocation, how they can move. Those three parts, especially.
So most of your international hires, have you hired them from Tokyo, or have you recruited them from overseas and brought them here?
We brought from abroad.
Oh, okay. It's about different. Shin, I mean, you started hiring foreign engineers a long time ago.
Right. So the hiring is really the key for the company growth, right? So it's so important to hire like talents from globally, and especially like AI engineers, like app UI UX engineers, software engineers are very very hard to find good ones in Japan. Yeah, and so we decided to kind of recruit for overseas, and especially in Eastern Europe, there are many, many good engineers, and who actually want to work in Japan, especially in Tokyo. So all we needed to do is to just issue a visa.
Well, that's the theory.
Yeah. Yes.
But for all those engineers you were hiring, obviously you're looking at their skills, but was there anything else you were looking at that said, okay, this person probably won't do well in Japan. This person might not adjust to Japan well. Were there like other filters you had?
Well, depending on once we think this person is high level engineer, we want to hire. About like if they can be okay living in Japan or not. Most of the time, it's fine. Just because the engineers who apply to Seven Dreamers are big fan of Japan already. Like they like anime, manga, characters. So.
Now, see, to me,
Yeah.
in my own experience, that's almost a danger sign. I found that. I mean, from my own experience, I found that the engineers that I've hired who have lasted the longest were the ones that didn't have a special interest in Japan.
Really?
Yeah, I found the ones that really had a passion about, I don't know, anime or martial arts, they would get here and then after a year, they would be disillusioned. They would find out Japan wasn't what they thought and they'd be very depressed and want to go home.
Oh, really?
So you haven't found that?
Yeah, well, no. So
Maybe
I
it's
think
just
we
the
got
people
lucky.
I attract. I don't know.
Probably. That's you, maybe.
Jordan, what do you do to kind of manage expectations and to make sure that everyone knows what they're getting into when they come into Zeihitomo?
Sure. So I think it's a really important question because hiring, like Shin said, is one of the most important things that you can do as a company, right? Is to have the right talent on board, to have the right team in place to really push forward. And I think that in addition to trying to find a right cultural fit, language is kind of another layer on top of that. That makes it an extra kind of dimension of potential challenge. And so what we do for everybody is we actually start off with a trial period. And people start off either as an intern, as a consultant, as a part-timer, and we try it out. And usually after a month, we can tell if it's a good cultural fit and if there's language or other problems that kind of come up in between. And I would say that, we can try to explain how the culture is, make sure that people are being comfortable, called by their first names, make sure that foreigners are comfortable taking off their shoes when they come into the office, right? Both ways. But on top of that, I think really actually trying to work together is the real final determinator. And so it's, in case it isn't a good fit, then we can, end ways after kind of having seen that experience. But it's really good. It's important for us as a company to make sure that whoever's going to join the team is going to be able to really be highly motivated and can be able to contribute a lot. And similarly for the person that would consider joining, that they have an experience of working with us and saying, hey, this is a team where I really can feel like I can give it my all, I can be really challenged and motivated and grow.
Well, I can see that. I mean, the trial period is so important, I mean, for everyone, especially with Japanese labor law being so strict.
Yes. That's right.
But, so, I mean, the things you mentioned, like taking off your shoes, and those seem like very superficial, simple things that everyone can do. But when you talk about someone not being a cultural fit, what sort of misunderstandings or what sort of things make someone not a cultural fit in a multicultural company?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things is a lot of, and I don't like to generalize, but you could say that many Japanese that work at very domestic places kind of like the idea of working at a more international environment, right? Where it's not about the hours that you put in, but it's about the results that you produce. Where it's not about seniority, but it's really having a chance and without that ceiling to make a difference. But a lot of people who have that kind of that muscle memory of this is how it works for a long time, when they come into another environment, even if they think that they want to work in an international environment, that then they'll kind of fall back on, well, I don't want to kind of go outside the bounds, but I'll just work longer to make up for it. Or
so they sort of like the image of a foreign company.
Yes.
But actually, that's kind of the opposite as what I was saying with Shin about the foreigners coming to Japan because they love Japan.
Yeah.
It's I guess a lot of Japanese think they would love the freedom of a foreign style workplace, but once they experience it, it's not to their taste.
And so I think, in some of the cases, it's really up to kind of management to make sure that they can fit in and they can know that, okay, it's okay to challenge something, right? Right. If we make decisions and, if we're using my opinions and say I'm right half the time, right, the other half the time if nobody says anything, there's going to be it's a problem, right? And so, I think saying that we want to use opinions, I think a lot of companies will have these great values that they put out but aren't actually followed, right?
Yeah,
So I think actually following those and actually, that first time that you speak up in a meeting, right, we're full of Japanese or something, right? How do you actually get over that hurdle? And so I think, try to use a little bit of internal gaijin power to just, pull out the best in people. And but that generally tends to be one of the bigger challenges.
Okay. Well, I think one of the situations we're sort of all in is that there's no blueprint. There's no rule book for having multilingual, multicultural teams. I think all four of us and a lot of you out there are still trying to figure it out. And as everyone who's worked with startups knows, you learn by making mistakes. Well, hopefully you learn by looking at other people's mistakes, but failing that, you learn from your own. And so looking back at all the things you've tried and pivoted and had to change, what was the biggest mistake you made, and what did you learn from it? Shin?
So biggest mistake in which field? Like hiring foreign people or in business?
No, that's a much broader category. But I'd say either in hiring or managing the multilingual or multicultural staff.
Well, actually, exactly as you mentioned that, we really don't care much about, what kind of languages or where people come from. So we did not care too much about the people who did not speak Japanese at all. So I thought that the people who speak both languages, take care of them. And actually they did, but that was not good enough. So 2 or 3 small group of, the non-Japanese speaking engineers was always together. But I thought someone was really taking care of them. But, after a while, really I realized that they're really lacking information what's going on in the company.
So it wasn't just they were lacking kind of social connection, they were lacking some of the information they needed to do their jobs.
Right. Well, the latter case. So, in the startup, every day new information, new things, new trouble, solving. So they just couldn't keep up to date. So after several months, they were so behind in information, and I did not know.
So what was the solution? Was the solution just putting in a formal process where the managers had to be responsible for making sure they had this information in both languages?
So I tried that. I tried, to put one, Japanese and English speaking engineer to be a bridge of the team, but that was kind of too late. Within probably 6 or 7 months, everybody quit. So that was really bad. They are so smart engineers. I really didn't want to lose, but we lost.
Wow.
But now, so as I mentioned that before, that now I realize that we have to have a bilingual leader in at least a manager or director position, so that these guys get to know the latest information in the company all the time. So then, a lot of engineers or even sales and marketing people really enjoy what company life, basically.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of companies, particularly as they're growing, there's this tendency to say, we are primarily a foreign-owned company and we're hiring Japanese sales and support staff, or we are primarily a Japanese company, but we need foreign engineering expertise. And it sounds like in either case, you need to have not just the teams and the employees mixed, but the executive staff needs to be both Western and or foreign and Japanese.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Jordan, what about you? What was the you haven't had quite as long a time as Shin to make mistakes, but what's the biggest mistake you guys made, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, I partially answered this with my last statement in terms of the cultural fit and just kind of making sure that people actually want to do what they say they want to do, and I think that's been a part of it. And I think tied to that is something I've learned at previous life experiences and stuff like that. I think lots of people talk about hire slow, fire fast. I think in our case it's kind of hire fast, fire fast is the motto. I mean, in terms of hiring fast, it's if it seems like there's a potential to be a good fit. We try it out, right? And if it's not going to work out, it's in nobody's best interest. And if you have somebody that's maybe not performing, it's demotivating for the entire team. It's not good for them as an individual. But when we have an all-star, we really just try to kind of convert as fast as possible.
Now, I think that idea of hire fast and fire fast, it works. It resonates well with Western engineers and designers because that really is that's kind of like the whole startup idea.
Yeah.
But have you found like Japanese staff to be less receptive to this? Because a lot of times, I mean, if you're pulling someone out of Oracle or IBM or pulling them out of another company, and you say 6 months later, well, 5.5 months later, say sorry, it's not working out.
Yep.
I think a lot of Westerners they get that, but I mean doesn't that really come off as shocking to a lot of Japanese?
Yeah, no, so I think after 5.5 months, it's clearly not a good situation for anybody, right? And I think the ideal situation is we tried it out and it didn't work as a trial. And usually within a month, you can have pretty good conviction after working with a person directly. And if we're not sure, maybe we'll extend it for another month or so. But no more than 3 months of any trial period. You'll have pretty good conviction of what's going to happen. I think there will still be cases where it's not going to work out, but I think it's going to be worse for the company overall. If somebody who is not performing and is, they're clearly not motivated or they're having a hard time. If they're motivated, we can just try to change their role or change their position.
Right.
But if it's not a good environment, and I think we've been very fortunate in terms of the process that we've set up that we haven't really seen this again. We're still a very early company, and I think our team is full of all-stars right now. But I think the whole process of trying it out for both sides has been really healthy. And if something else is on top of that, it's in nobody's best interest for it to continue. So I think that's part of maybe a little bit of what comes with the Western mentality that we come with our culture. But
so was that a system you had from the very beginning, or was that something that you kind of you learned along the way?
I think that was from the beginning. So I've seen in previous jobs and previous companies, in terms of the way things work, it's in everybody's best interest for all the employees, for everybody to really be able to step up and do the best. And I don't mean this in like a strict way, as like, oh, somebody's so we should, by the way, I think that's sending absolutely the wrong message, right? We try to empower everybody to give them all the chances they can to succeed. But I just mean if there's clearly not a right cultural fit, again, we're able to usually identify that during the trial period. So even if we decide, meet somebody who's like, hey, let's start tomorrow, right? Let's try this out for a little bit. If it doesn't work, then we say, hey, maybe we can introduce you to this other company or this other fit, or maybe we want to try doing this. So I don't mean in like the kind of scary sense of like, oh, like everybody's head is on the line every single day. It's I think everybody has a lot of trust within the other members, and I think we've done a really good job on behalf of all the employees, and kind of everybody in terms of kind of seeing to their kind of future goals as individuals and as a company, making sure that those are lined up.
Okay.
But it's really important that at the beginning, if I think one of the things that companies lock themselves into is if you hire without having an experience of working together, and after a month they're like, like maybe it wasn't the best fit, then it's very awkward, right? It's a much harder conversation to have than if you started off as, hey, it's a trial, let's see if we can work well together or not.
Makes sense. Naomi, what about you? What would you say it has been your biggest mistake in terms of managing multicultural teams, and what did you learn from it?
Fortunately, I didn't have a big mistake yet.
Not yet. Anyway, it's okay.
Yet.
That's good. It's coming. It's
right. Right, however, the one initial earlier member left company recently. I think there should be several reasons, but the one reason was language. We knew he didn't speak English much, and I think he had a bit of ego allergy.
Oh, okay.
allergy. However, we thought it okay, but it was not okay at the end, and it was really the big issue. He was easily isolated from the team, so we are now really how we can make everyone is happy to work and feeling happy in the company. We are now discussing how we can achieve that.
Well, I think that's really interesting because it was unlike Shin's example where it was foreigners trying to operate in a Japanese company and feeling isolated, you had a Japanese staff in a Japanese company feeling isolated because everyone was trying to speak English. Have you had trouble recruiting Japanese staff because of that rule, or have you had people join expecting, kind of what Jordan was saying before, that the image of an English language workforce sounded good, but have you had staff join and then discover that, wow, I really do have to speak English and this is really hard?
After hiring him, the left one, we actually shifted to prioritize the English speaking things. So we don't have much issues for this moment.
Okay. That's excellent. Let's see. I think I've got time for just one more question, and then I'm going to open up for Q&A from the audience. And I'll give all of you a crack at the panel. And I guess what I want to ask is, I've been in Japan a long time, and I've worked at big Japanese companies, I've worked at little Japanese startups, I've started my own companies, and one of the things I've noticed that right now there is a real shortage of engineering talent and design talent, and I think that a lot of companies are being, let's say, more flexible than they usually would in hiring. So I think a lot of companies are hiring because that's the only way they can fill the slots. And we all know business moves in cycles. So right now business is good. Sometime in the future it's going to turn around and it's going to head back down. And I guess what I want to ask you is, do you think this is a permanent change? Do you think that we're going to see Japanese companies continue to be more open to foreign staff? Or do you think that when the economic downturn comes, it'll go back to normal? Naomi, what do you think?
I think yes, the Japan should continue to look for foreign talent. I think just because of the decreasing population, it's simple.
Okay, yeah. So you think that in effect that lack of available talent is going to continue? All right, Jordan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the number of foreigners in Japan is probably only going to increase unless something drastic changes. I think that companies are more and more thinking about how they can be competitive globally. And I think Naomi's point about the shrinking population, it's never been a better time to be a young Japanese person in Japan. You're going to have all the options you want in terms of workplace, at least here domestically, compared to many years ago. But I think the bigger challenge is really if foreigners in Japan, I don't hear many foreigners in Japan say, yes, I want to work at a Japanese corporate, right? That's my goal right now. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think companies are trying to change so that they can be more accommodative of different styles and kind of more staff. But for companies to be competitive, I think they do need the diversity, and I think that it will be a growing trend. But I think it's going to be the corporates here are facing an uphill challenge to an extent.
Well, I think to what you're saying, I think a lot of the openness we're seeing towards startups has kind of spilled over into a flexibility and openness to working with foreign companies and foreign staff. And my sense is that it is something permanent has shifted, at least a little bit. Shin, you've been doing this the longest. What's your take? Does this feel like a permanent shift to you?
Well, yeah, in a way, yes. Unless we have economic crisis like back in 2008. At that time, we were not hiring any Japanese or foreigner. That was a really hard time. But except that kind of occasion that definitely we are, not just us, all the Japanese companies like mega enterprises or startups will keep hiring foreigners because more and more demand for the communication with the global market, and definitely we are lacking in talents, not just engineers, sales and marketing, global marketing, digital marketing. So yeah, definitely this movement is kind of permanent.
All right, fantastic. Well, listen, let's give our panelists a big round of applause, and I'd like to open it up for questions from anyone. Yeah, do we have someone can get him a mic?
Hi there. I was just wondering, as someone who has a little bit of experience managing a team here in Japan, in some sense, the traditional startup, the image of a startup is in a unicultural setting. And I wanted to speak to the issue about work-life balance, because it seems to me when you're dealing with multicultural here, you have on the one hand something like Jordan's experience where the Japanese staff might not be used to the culture. It's sort of an away game for them within the company. But then on the other hand, your foreign talent has sort of the same away game on the outside of the company. And in that sense, a traditionally startup in a unicultural startup, the work-life balance might sort of be secondary because you're kind of used to the work-life balance being managed by the employee and the company not really having to foster it so much. Do you find, and are you conscious of this being a sort of a challenge, an additional challenge in a multicultural environment where you have to help foster the away game for Japanese talent who are working in a startup situation, as well as foreign talent who are perhaps not used to their environment outside of the company?
So it's basically, do Japanese and foreign staff have different expectations for a work-life balance, and how do you manage that?
Correct. I mean,
right.
I feel like they do have different expectations for work-life balance. I'm just interested in the perspective of startups that have a multicultural environment and whether they take the initiative to foster the additional complexity that's involved in maintaining a work-life balance.
Naomi, do you what does InfoSeller? Do you guys do anything special in that regard?
Right. Basically, I want to introduce the, how can I say in English, flex time, and also remote work, the homework. However, I thought it depends on the phase of the startups. The very early phase, when we are developing the initial service, I cannot accept the remote work because the performance in the same team in one place is much bigger than the remote team in the beginning phase, development phase. So I think it depends on the company phase, but in general, once we achieve the running phase, I do the remote work, flexible time work. Yes.
From my own experience, when you're in the startup phase, it's sort of like, okay, you're in a startup, you don't get to have a work-life balance. You're really focused on whatever you're doing, and I don't care what country you're from. It seems to me like as a company gets bigger, once you get past that phase, you have a corporate culture that is the same for all employees, and it might lean one way or the other. But it seems like most companies make a choice one way or the other. Shin, what's been your experience on that?
Well, like our expectation for employees, any employees for the work and life balance, like the same for Japanese and the people from overseas, and I feel like whoever comes, and they kind of get used to the environment in the company.
Well, Seven Dreamers has a very Japanese cultural feel to it.
Yeah.
So the foreigners just sort of lean that direction and fit into the company culture.
I think so. Like they used to it. They get used to it. I think.
Well, no, but there is really big differences. So, for example, a lot of foreigners have trouble with the whole idea of once a year there's a company retreat that everyone just takes a weekend and goes off together. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, we are actually very much Japanese style startup, but we're very flexible.
Okay.
So maybe that's why they don't mind.
Okay, that's cool. Jordan, you guys are kind of coming from the other direction, being very foreign flavored. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what you said about there's one corporate culture. And I think that people kind of tend to adapt to that, and that's part of the real cultural fit with the company, right? We do have a more Western approach to it, and I think the Japanese members that join our team like that approach, which is why they join us. In terms of work-life balance, we do quarterly kind of performance reviews and OKRs with everybody, and make it clear to everybody that the number of hours you worked cannot come up in any of those conversations because that's not what's important. And I think a lot of people will. More Japanese will think, is like, well, maybe if I put in the extra hours and I show that I'm working hard and this, but if that comes up in the conversations, basically that's a non-starter. So really just trying to hammer home some of the more Western principles. Per Naomi's point, like we did also have a bit more of a flex time. Like we don't have any fixed working hours. We don't have any fixed set of, number of holidays. It's very much up to you to kind of, hit your targets and, really help grow the team and be a player. But we did find that a little bit too much freedom was hard at the early stage. If everybody's working remotely or that day says, oh, yeah, I'm not going to be there, I'll be here, blah, blah, blah. So we do encourage coming to the office a bit more within some teams. But that said, we are, functionally, we don't I hope we never get to a point where we're caring about how many days people are in and out of the office or hours and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Lots. Over here. Give that woman a mic.
Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm actually doing my master's degree here in Hitotsubashi University. I'm doing public policy. So my question is, I want to sort of redefine the meaning of recruiting foreigners here, because I think rather than enticing experienced foreigners to actually relocate to Japan and work for your companies, I think the opportunities actually lie in the number of international students either doing their masters in Japan, Seimongako, learning Japanese, or actually doing their undergrad here in Japan. At the same time, in my personal experience, in my own circle, those people either have never heard about startups or just completely rule it out. So their minds are set into working for the big Japanese companies. So I want to hear your take on it. Individually, if possible, what do you think about tapping into the fresh grads, international fresh grads, and do you have any ongoing strategy, or do you plan to do something about these type of very special demography? Thank you.
Okay, that's a really good question. So when we're talking about, great, more time than we thought. Excellent. So we were talking about when you're talking about recruiting. So all of us have talked about trying to recruit from overseas or pull people out of other companies. But in your experience, are you recruiting from universities and tapping into the international community there? And why or why not? Jordan? Oh, yeah.
So no, I think great question, and there definitely is. I see as well an increased number of international students attending startup-related events, kind of having that mindset, wanting to get involved. I think one of the challenges is that there's a lot of international students that don't speak Japanese, but also don't have, are looking for less technical jobs, right? So like public policy or marketing and a lot of those areas. And I think for a lot of the jobs that we look for, I guess more at the entry level, well, I'd say for Japanese native speakers, we have a number of different jobs that we could, within sales or operations or marketing or development. On the English-speaking side, it's mostly on the product side, right? In terms of if you're a full-stack JavaScript developer coming out of college, yes, we'd love, do an internship and potentially convert. So I'd say I wish we could better use all the international talent in the universities. If there was, and I think, this may just be our company in the fact that we're going after a pretty domestic market and that we need native Japanese for a handful of the less technical roles. But I see more and more startup events that are related to students with that background. And so I think it's, we do really like new grads as well. But we just need them to either be Japanese or have a technical background.
So have you hired international students from university here?
So we're doing internships with a few right now. I think it's a great way for interns to do kind of a long-term internship. Once they graduate, if it's a good fit, they can obviously come on full-time. We've also taken a couple of students that have been not right when they graduated in April, because we haven't had that luxury of time, but people that had been doing more kind of freelancing or small other jobs at startups, and shortly after, like within a year, coming on board as well.
Shin, what about you? Have you recruited international engineering talent from the universities, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. I also want to know how to get access to those like talents.
Well, you two need to talk after the panel.
Right. Okay. Good.
Naomi?
This is for my InfoSales case. Unfortunately, we don't have enough resources to educate the young students. So we need the good, skilled, experienced engineers or business person. So for us, unfortunately, we don't have a good resource to do so.
And from my own experience, from the companies I've run in the past, my own companies, I've always found it challenging to hire from the international students who are studying here, because a lot of them, to what Jordan said, a lot of them don't speak fluent Japanese, and a lot of them are not really clear what they want, and it's I've always tried to hire just people with a few years of experience. And I think that the larger the company is, the more willing they are to take on interns and be able to train them and to kind of take a long-term view. But that's been my experience on it. Great. Another question. You had a question right there.
Thank you. So other than access to global talent, clients and investors, are there any advantages to speaking in English at work?
Oh, we said like in order to.
Yeah, that was great. That was actually one of my backup questions. That's a great question.
Right. So, like, what investors overseas?
No, are there any advantages
to
speaking English at work, and other than just being able to recruit a bigger talent pool, are there any other advantages to having multilingual staff? More creative, different problem solving,
smarter. Yeah, like a lot of advantages, I think. Well, in our case, obviously, we want to expand globally. So, more, like bilingual or like foreign language speakers are always welcome. That's one. But in terms of the culture thing, we want to mix as much as we can. It's like all Japanese oji-san, old man culture is no good, right? So more women, more younger and elder people, and mix from the U.S., Asia, Europe. So it's all mix is always a good thing, I think. Yeah.
Naomi, have you found advantages to having mixed teams other than just bigger talent pool?
Well, it's easier to go to global, definitely. If the business is only Japanese domestic, I don't think I don't know much the benefit, but if someone goes to global, the definitely English speaking multicultural team is required. For example, we often got the foreign potential customers or investors, partners, and then if they only see Japanese in the team and the people speak in Japanese all the time, I don't think it's good to make a relationship with them. So that's my answer.
Okay. Jordan?
Quickly, I completely agree on the culture point. I think that it's a diversity is not only kind of gender and age and stuff like that, but I think backgrounds as well. And if you're able to have people from a diverse background that can work towards a common goal, I think that's great. And I also just think it's a much more effective language for communicating and making decisions that are needed in a startup environment, as opposed to the method of kind of major consensus and kind of the more traditional Japanese ways of communicating. I think the communication style is mixed into culture, and maybe I'm banging this too much, but it's something I think pretty strongly, and it allows us to kind of use gaijin power internally to that extent.
Well, I'm gonna give an answer that's probably a little unpopular for this room, but I think when you're in the startup phase, and I mean, say 5 people, 6 people or less, having a multicultural team is actually a negative. It does slow you down. Communication is slower. You sort of have to. Everyone has different styles. There's a lot of things that, if it was everyone's coming from the same culture, can be left unsaid that you have to say. But once the team gets 15, 20, or more, there really does seem to be a solid advantage to having that diversity of opinion. And at that point, I think the difference is when you have like a management structure, you already have that built-in inefficiency. And having that extra creativity, forcing the managers to think differently and be flexible can add to the value of a company. But I think early on, when you're just a few people, having a multicultural team actually makes things a bit harder. Cool. Next question. Yes.
So, in terms of communication, besides the language, do you do something differently to communicate streamlessly with all the multicultural people? Do you do something different other than language? My experience was trying to simplify the language as simple as possible, or trying to kind of present with more visual images. What kind of
So do you mean do they have different processes for people from different cultures? Do they treat people differently, or do they have special processes to?
Does your company have a special communication process or working method to communicate between all the multicultural people?
Shin, I think you're the one to talk about this.
Yeah, actually, we don't have any trick. When the English-speaking employee make presentations, they make in English, and Japanese people need to understand, right? So they, gradually pick up the English slides, and the other way around. So we really don't have any rule or trick.
Well, but before you were mentioning that you make it explicitly part of the manager's job that they have to get the communication done.
Yeah. Well, that is more of the each person's how should I say? For example, I really don't care what to speak in the company, right? So people see me, okay, I speak English, here, and then speak Japanese here. So people start to get mixed, kind of. So more director or managers do the same thing. The people follow. So, for example, when I'm in the meeting, when someone is start to make presentation in Japanese, I kind of translate. So more and more people start to do this. So that's why I'm saying that the people executives should be bilingual more and more.
Okay. we've got time for, I think, just one more question. So who has a burning question they have to ask? In the back, in the vest. Nope, that's you.
Thank you. My name is Robert. I'm a master's student in machine learning. And my question is to all the panelists, though I think Mr. Fisher and Mr. Sakane could be more fit, and maybe Mr. Romero. The startup scene on a global perspective and the startup scene on a Japanese perspective, what are the differences that you have picked, and what are the similarities that maybe have helped you find the best momentum to navigate into Japan?
It's a great question. Jordan, why don't you take that one first? What's the big differences or the important differences between the startup cultures in the West and in Japan?
So I think one of the biggest hints is in the question itself. What are the biggest differences is in the culture? And I think that that's one of the reasons that we try to take a more Western cultural approach to what we're doing in Japan. I think that obviously, depending on your culture, I think your approaches are going to be different. But I think the biggest difference is actually the environment. So in the Valley or in more kind of mature startup ecosystems, you obviously have a lot more talent that are experienced in startups, right? You have a lot more funding flowing around. You have a lot more people that are then moving, just lots of opportunities purely within the startup spectrum. But in Tokyo, you have less people that have experienced the startup ride. You have, less maybe entrepreneur investors, right? You have more salaryman VCs here. And so I think the environment is quite different. And I would say I was in, California over 10 years ago in college, and as a comp sci major, all of my friends graduated went to Silicon Valley. So I remember, kind of seeing and feeling that rise, when I was there, over the last, 10, 15 years ago. But I get a little bit of that feeling here in Japan now. So it's not clear the same scale or the same momentum. But I think we are moving in a similar trajectory overall. And so I think that it will take time for the environment to catch up. But when the environment is not the same, then it becomes that much harder to attract talent, to attract funding, to do a lot of things. So, the wind is at our back in Tokyo for doing startups here. And things I think will only get better and easier as we have more talent and we have more kind of experienced startup minds flowing around in the space here. But to me, the environment is the biggest differentiator. And in terms of the cultural differences, it just depends on how you apply that culture.
Naomi, you're pretty active in the startup scene both here in Japan, and you're dealing with a lot of startups in the West too. So what do you think are the most important differences, and why do they matter?
I think I compare US and Japan, and I see the top brilliant talent in US goes to startups, but in Tokyo, someone from University of Tokyo or Kyoto University go to a big company or consulting company, banking company. So I think that is a big difference, and I think that should be changed.
So you think that talent is more, top talent in the West wants to go to startups, and top talent in Japan, you have to pull very hard to get them into your startup. Yeah, I've seen that too. Shin?
Yeah, the environment in Japanese startup field is really getting better and better. The scales are smaller, number of startups are smaller, but the environment is pretty much as good as what's in Silicon Valley, I believe. But the only difference in startups, for example, in the US and Japan, are the US startups see global market from the beginning. But Japanese startups, a lot of them still see domestic market only at the beginning. When they get really succeeded, then they go abroad. So that's the only difference, I think.
That's true. And my take on it's if you listen to the Disrupting Japan podcast, the differences between the global markets and the Japanese startup market is something I talk about a lot. And it's something I get asked a lot. And so, I could give you a 2-hour answer to that question, but it wouldn't answer what I think the the real question you're asking is. And for all the differences from startups, whether you're looking at in San Francisco or Berlin and Tokyo, there are a ton of differences, but the similarity is most important. The most difficult thing for any startup, no matter where you are, is building up a customer base, creating value that customers want, and being able to deliver that. And that similarity is universal. And you can take a startup founder from Senegal or London or Tokyo or San Francisco, and they will have more in common with each other than they would from an executive at a large corporation anywhere in the world. So in many ways, I think the similarities are much stronger and more important than any difference. It seems like our time is up. I want to thank 500 Startups for inviting us and putting on this event, and let's give our panel a huge round of applause.
And we're back. You know, there are no real rules or best practices for working with multinational and multicultural teams, especially at startups. I mean, once a company becomes big enough, then the corporate culture becomes so much stronger than the individuals or even the national culture that the employees bring to work with them. But for startups, well, we are all breaking new ground here, and we're trying to figure things out together. We'll definitely be having more events like this in the future, and if you want to make sure you get an invitation, drop by the Disrupting Japan site and sign up on the announcement list. There's going to be a lot more good stuff coming. But most of all, thanks for listening. And thank you for letting people interested in Japanese startups know about the show. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for listening to Disrupting Japan.